Welcome, AP Bio, to Chapter 21, where we're talking about natural selection. So we're going to start off with 21.1. Take a moment to look around you. Look at your family members, look at the plants outside. No two organisms are 100% completely alike. There's going to be variations, even if they're very minor. Variation exists in every single population. And those differences in traits are sometimes going to be superficial, and sometimes they're going to allow for you to have greater success at some things than other things. So, for example, if you're taller, maybe you're a little bit better at reaching something off the top shelf. And so, as conditions in the environment change, certain traits may now be better or more beneficial, or maybe suddenly less beneficial because your conditions are changing. And it's important to remember as we're talking about evolution and natural selection, not just is there variation, but also the whole meaning behind life. So you exist because your parents reproduced. I know you don't like to think about that, but that's how you got here. Your ancestors before them lived because their ancestors reproduced. Life makes more life. That's one of the core tenets of what life is the ability to reproduce. And so who reproduces is going to guide which traits are in the next generation. Life is a continual struggle. And so if you are better suited to surviving by gathering resources, you're more likely to be able to pass on those traits that helped you out. So, as we've said, there's variation among individuals in a population, and that is going to play a big role in determining your odds of surviving to reproductive age and how many offspring you produce. So, for example, if there's a green trait and a blue trait, and the blue trait offspring survive more, well, more blue offspring are going to be made in future generations because there's more blue that survive to reproductive age. Similarly, if the blue trait allows for you to produce more offspring, even though we were at 50% blue, 50% green in one generation, in the next generation, all of a sudden 2/3 of the population have that blue trait. So having more offspring means those traits are going to be a bigger part of the population. And those differences in reproductive success add up. Difference between 4 kids and 2 kids may not seem that great, but over many generations, all of a sudden, you go from a 50-50 split to now a 2/3 split to now all of a sudden most have that one trait because you're producing more offspring. This change is what we call evolution. So, where does this variation come from? Well, one source of variation is mutation. So, this is a change in your DNA sequence. This happens spontaneously, randomly, and totally unavoidably. You are a mutant. You possess mutations that neither of your parents had. Probably not weather control like Storm, but you yourself are a mutant with new variations on traits that your parents did not have. And these mutations can end up leading to new alleles. So we haven't discussed genetics yet, but an allele is just a different version of a gene for a trait. So let's look at these flamingos here. If the gene or the trait is the coloration of the flamingo's feathers, one allele could be pink feathers and the other allele could be purple feathers. It's the same gene coding for feather color, but different versions of it. So that's what we refer to as alleles. And another form of variation comes from this sexual reproduction. When two parents mix their genes, you're taking half from mom, half from dad, and creating a brand new combination of those traits. And so this allows for way more variation as well. We're not just relying on random mutations to suddenly create new traits, but also this reshuffling of the deck to create new combinations where combination of multiple genes may provide better fitness. And I want to resolve one big misconception around evolution. Sometimes people like to say like, oh, I evolved, or an individual has evolved because maybe they've created a mutation. Evolution is a population level phenomenon. So just because you have a mutation that allows you to be a little bit different, even if that trait is better, You did not evolve. Populations evolve. So it's only evolution. That's just a mutation if you're different. It's evolution if over time that mutation spreads among the population because you're having more offspring. Those offspring are surviving better, reproducing more, and so now a greater percentage of the population has that trait. So, what are some of the conclusions that we can come to from this? Well, one, in order to develop the diversity of life we see on Earth today, the Earth has to be incredibly old because, as we've discussed, this is a very slow and gradual process. And if organisms evolve from pre existing organisms, then theoretically all organisms should share a universal common ancestor known as LUCA, or our last universal common ancestor. So both of these conclusions we can make as we look at these evolutionary processes. That's it for 21.1, and we're actually going to be skipping 21.2 because that's going to deal with some genetic components that we'll be addressing once we've talked about genetics.